Hello, I'm Rudranath Sanyal. Welcome to War and Peace, your go-to program on security matters and geopolitics. For this special edition of War and Peace, the War and Peace team is in Jaipur with veteran security analyst Mr. N.S. Sisodia, who's studied the nuances of the new hypersonic era, the new era of hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missiles. Eminent defense scientist Dr. A. Shavasana Pillai has joined us from Chennai, and Lieutenant General Satish Nambiar, former commander of the UN Peacekeeping Force, has joined us from Noida. Well, viewers, as the year ended, that is 2019 ended, one of the major developments or a point that had to be noticed was that there were claims about hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missiles. So, is that going to be a paradigm shift? Is that going to alter the security environment completely? We must examine that in this edition of War and Peace in the new year. So, our lead topic for you in this edition of War and Peace is hypersonic ballistic missiles. When Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was killed in the US airstrike in Iraq, the predictable weapon of choice was the remote control, multi-role Reaper drone. Its advantage was its accuracy, along with a high subsonic speed of 350 kilometers per hour. Modern fighter jets can fly at faster supersonic speeds, but cannot be remote controlled and are not suitable for time-sensitive targets. But now, what has caught the attention of military strategists are remote projectiles with hypersonic speed. A hypersonic projectile or missile is the one that can travel at 5 times the speed of sound or more, that is, beyond 6,000 kilometers per hour. Russia says it has even developed hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missiles. The other 3 countries that have developed expertise in the domain of hypersonic platforms are India, the United States, and China. Some military analysts are of the view that the advent of hypersonic weapons in this new decade is a paradigm shift of the modern security environment in which certain new military strategies will have to be adopted. In the new situation, both military headquarters and tactical battle areas will need to gear up for a variety of actions and reactions in double quick time. With hypersonic systems, integrated commands and positions like the Chief of Defense Staff will become all the more relevant. Let's begin with Mr. N.S. Sisodia, who has joined us here in Jaipur. Mr. Sisodia, what do you think is the essence of this hypersonic era? Do you think it's going to be a paradigm shift?
You are absolutely right. It is definitely a paradigm shift. It is 5 times that much more the speed of sound, and it can be even greater than that. In fact, there are claims that it is much greater than that. So, it's a dramatic change in the speed of weapon systems, and this will bring about tremendous changes in your strategy, in technology, in the kinds of resources which have to be devoted, in the kinds of armed forces which have to be trained for this purpose. So, certainly it is a paradigm shift. Now, if you look at this geopolitically and in terms of what is the balance of power in terms of security, of course, the Russians claim that they have already tested a hypersonic ICBM, but the Americans say that it does not bother them very much, because overall their assets are far superior to those of Russians, and therefore, even though in one particular niche technology they may have gone ahead, overall the balance of power lies with the Americans. That is their claim. I think there is some merit in that. I believe that the change has also worried the Americans, and they have started allocating some resources so that they can speed up the development towards hypersonic capability. One other country which is already in the field and which has made considerable progress is China, but India is not far behind. In fact, we have tested these capabilities in 2019 in the month of June, and we are the 4th nation in the world, which is very, very creditable for a country like India, and all credit goes to our DRDO scientists in this regard. Now, the point is, should this develop the way it is developing? It is a question that the statesmen, the decision makers at national level, the scientists in the field of defense and security have to all together consider, because already we are looking at ICBMs, and then you have to develop counter defense capabilities, you have to have assets which can also counter those attacks. Do you have to do similar things for hypersonic capabilities? Yes, you will have to do that. So, you can imagine the kind of resources which will have to be allocated to this. And then you have cyber warfare, you already have space warfare. So, this is almost like scientific fiction, and one wonders where the mankind will go. So, I think apart from considering the developments of technology which are indeed very dramatic and very impressive, the question arises whether other aspects of decision making, like whether there should be some halt to this breathless pace of technological development to devote greater attention to stability, human security, development. These are questions we also have to separately address.
Right. Mr. Sisodia, so what you are perhaps hinting at is that this in itself, the hypersonic system mechanism in itself, will be another deterrence, form of a deterrent mechanism also.
Deterrence. But we have to keep remembering that they will develop, whoever is your adversary, he will also develop a capability to pierce through that deterrence. And it is an endless race. We were, we first developed guns, then there were guns from the other side, you developed ballistic missiles, you developed nuclear weapons, and that is now proliferated to 9 countries, maybe 10th country. North Korea is also very much in the race. So, this is an endless vicious circle, and it continues to develop. But of course, you cannot be romantic about it, you cannot expect everybody to have peaceful intentions. Therefore, you have to develop deterrence, and insofar as we develop this capability, it certainly gives greater assurance to the country and gives greater assurance to our armed forces that they will be able to deter any type of eventuality in a case of peace being broken, in case of warfare taking place.
Right. Now, let us go over to Dr. Shavasana Pillai, who has joined us from Chennai. Dr. Shavasana Pillai, Mr. N.S. Sisodia feels that this business of hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missile is almost like science fiction, which of course has become reality. So, what do you think of this hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missile? Is it a paradigm shift that's going to alter the security environment in a big measure?
It is true that there is going to be a big shift in the warfare and also the civilian application by using hypersonic technology. When we say hypersonic, it is the speed which matters. When the speed increases, kinetic energy becomes a square of the speed. So, you get tremendous power in delivering a warhead or payload when it is hypersonic. So hypersonic regime is a very important thing, and when we have mastered supersonic through BrahMos, it is time for us to enter into hypersonic cruise missile, which is going to be the future for our armed forces. It's also true that when we talk about ballistic missiles, normally it is a rocket system which goes for more than 10,000 kilometers and delivers the nuclear payload either as a single payload or through MIRV, that is multi-injection re-entry vehicles. But now when we go to hypersonic, the regime changes because the hypersonic flight takes the air as its oxidizer. The fuel to oxidizer ratio is 1:8. So when your air is available to you, the system becomes simpler. That means the ballistic missile will become simpler when you go for hypersonic system. The hypersonic system operates only after you have achieved certain minimum speed for the ballistic the injecting booster, and once the hypersonic missile takes over, it goes at constant speed in the atmosphere, maybe about 30 kilometer plus, and delivers the payload to that. The important point here is when you use simple hydrogen, which is used, the hydrogen can give a speed of more than 20. What has been claimed today by President Putin, the speed of more than 25, is a realizable thing with the hydrogen as the fuel. It is possible. So you are now entering into a new regime of intercontinental ballistic missile with a reduced system and which is transportable, which can move anywhere, and it delivers the payload at a very high speed. That means the velocity being higher, you get the power higher. Power, speed, precision, and non-interceptable system you are getting through the hypersonic regime.
And Dr. Shavasana Pillai, how should this mechanism of hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missile impact the other realms of security science?
One is the ballistic missile defense. We have configured a two-layer ballistic missile defense for incoming nuclear missiles. So this system provides both exo-atmosphere and endo-atmosphere interception. They are all we have to use for going high altitude of say 100 kilometer to intercept the incoming missile. We have to use only hypersonic missiles. So missiles fly at a very high speed to intercept because the time is very short. You are detecting the incoming missile to the missile launching, the interceptor, and then it intercepts. It's a hypersonic regime. See, when we talk about Agni, our ballistic missile, what we have, when it re-enters at a speed of 14 times the speed of sound. That is Mach number 14. So we are doing hypersonic regime in ballistic missiles. When we talk about the ASAT, anti-satellite system, it flies at a higher speed in the hypersonic regime when it intercepts the satellite. So similarly, there are many platforms which are already there where the hypersonic speed has been achieved, but they are not at constant speed or not at supersonic combustion driven hypersonic. So the main thing is when we talk about hypersonic civilian platforms, for example, the future aeroplanes, you want to go very fast between Delhi and New York within 1 hour, it is possible when you go for a hypersonic plane, hyperplane, you can go. So there are many other platforms coming up when we talk about hypersonic speed, but there are certain things where the speed is constant, which can take for a long distance.
And Dr. Shavasana Pillai, what has this journey been like from the supersonic era to the hypersonic era from the point of view of a scientist?
Yes, true. We definitely we have to get into hypersonic regime. We have already developed certain technology within the DRDO and ISRO on the supersonic combustion. When I say supersonic combustion, it means hypersonic speed. We have mastered ramjet technology. That is there. The air is rammed into the combustion chamber. That is what we have achieved through BrahMos and also in the Akash system. But what we are now attempting is to get a supersonic combustion, which will make the system to fly at very high speed. Presently we can use kerosene, which is normally used for the missile application, a special type of kerosene, with which we can go to Mach 8. This is what we can achieve. But when we go for hydrogen, it will be possible to go for 25, Mach 25, which will give a very increased this one. Why we are interested in the hypersonic, as you are asking, the people are interested to talk about hypersonic is the cost reduction. See, when you go for high speed, you are drawing the air from the atmosphere, your cost of the system comes down. And when you introduce reusability to that, the cost comes down very much. The reusable system can bring down the cost by 1/10 of normal cost which we are spending for putting a satellite. For example, if we have to put a satellite in the polar orbit, the cost per kg is $20,000. But if you are going for a reusable hypersonic system, then the cost comes down to $2,000 per kg. So there is a big advantage of hypersonic. That's why we are all working on the hypersonic regime. Many countries have started working on that, and India is also doing the work.
You're watching War and Peace, your go-to program on security matters and geopolitics. And for this special edition of War and Peace, the War and Peace team is in Jaipur with veteran security analyst Mr. N.S. Sisodia, who was the Director General of the Institute of Defense Studies and also a Secretary in the Ministry of Defense. We'll take a break now. Please keep watching.
Informative, incisive, intensive. Get your daily dose of news and analysis in English News Night every weekday at 9 p.m. on DD India. Channel number 620 on Tata Sky, 199 on Dish TV, 150 on Airtel, 28 on UCN and 395 on Videocon D2H.
Welcome back. You're watching War and Peace, your go-to program on security matters and geopolitics. Okay, now let's go over to Lieutenant General Satish Nambiar, who has joined us from Noida. General Satish Nambiar, what was it like, when you joined the army as a young second lieutenant? We keep asking this question, but in the context of this recent development, this recent hypersonic development, how would you, distinguish between the two periods? Is it also a paradigm shift according to you?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's a continuation of what used to be prevalent during the Cold War era, when the Western Bloc and the Soviet Bloc sort of confronted each other with developments, technological developments. When I look back on this period that you have reflected on, the time when I joined the service and went through the almost 4 decades in Indian Army uniform, and then now I've been out of uniform for over 25 years now. So frankly, when one looks back, yes, one has seen the developments in the various arenas, like as I mentioned, the nuclear, the missile development, etc., and a lot in the space developments in space. But none of that seemed to have changed anything that was certainly what the Indian Army had to deal with, and that I think will continue to be what we are dealing with. It basically are going to continue to be armies like ours will continue to deal with proxy wars, with, of course, in our case we have the added necessity of always being prepared to deal with any adventures that our adversaries may launch against us.
How is it going to change the situation from the point of view of the Army and also the Air Force, of course?
See, now, I mean, I haven't done any detailed study on this, and I'm not an expert on the subject. But from the knowledge that one has in this area, I can only say that the normal operations of the Army and the Air Force and all are not immediately affected in that sense of the word, because the basic, I think, connotation of this development is that the Russians claim that they have developed a capacity that will enable their missiles to break in from the atmosphere or stratosphere or whatever at very great speeds, and thus overcome the missile defenses that the Americans have developed. And I'm sure the Americans also would be developing something like that. And in due course, there will be an counter to this arrangement also, which will be developed by both sides. So insofar as armies like ours are concerned, Air Forces, Navy, I don't think there's any immediate impact on our strategic sort of thought or need for any revision of thought. This is something which we have to watch and see how it develops. Personally, I think it is not something that is going to have any immediate effect on our sort of preparations or the manner in which we prepare for the conduct of war.
To go back to Dr. Shavasana Pillai once again in Chennai. Dr. Pillai, you've been the author of a book on ocean warfare. How is Hypersonic Intercontinental Ballistic Missile about to change the dynamics of ocean warfare?
See, in the world, the anti-ship missiles used by the navies, they are all subsonic. Only India and Russia have got supersonic cruise missiles. So when you go in a supersonic speed, what happens is because of the speed, you are reaching the target in lesser time. That is about 1/3 time, which helps you to have a precise hit on the target. This is what we have seen in BrahMos. Why BrahMos is superior to all the anti-ship missiles today is because of its speed. Tomahawk is subsonic, so we are going for supersonic, which helps in reduced time of flight. It helps in higher speed, that means kinetic energy is 9 times, and you are able to kill it with high probability. So these are the advantages of the supersonic system which we have done. Now there can be, in over a period of time, some interceptor to stop the BrahMos type of missiles. That is why there is a need for hypersonic. When you go for hypersonic at a speed something like Mach 7, what the biggest advantage is, you are getting into 2.5 times more than what we have achieved in terms of speed. In terms of energy, it will be the square of the speed. It is achievable. That's why we have configured BrahMos 2, which is a hypersonic, and the initial developments in the technology we have started.
Okay, now General Nambiar, how do you think military diplomacy would get impacted in this era of hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missile?
The deterrent value of this will be significant, just as the deterrent value of the nuclear capabilities were. And again, this has to be related to what we have been witness to in the second half of the last century and the early part of this century. The fact that there was a certain degree of nuclear capability on these sides, and which many other countries have joined, including ours, that has imposed a considerable degree of deterrence on the adventurism that otherwise could have been resorted to by various players in the international arena. So certainly from the point of view of deterrence, this development will continue to play a great role in the international arena.
Dr. Shavasana Pillai in Chennai now.
Strength respects strength. So you have to accumulate the technologies which are superior over a period of time, and hypersonic technology gives a terrific advantage if you have got hypersonic missile in India. You have seen the President Putin's interviews where he has talked about hypersonic missiles, which is a powerful system because they are not interceptable by the NMDs. NMD can handle more than 100 targets at a time, but if it is a hypersonic re-entry system, it will penetrate the NMD. That's why he claims that I have hypersonics. He claims that.
Right. And Mr. N.S. Sisodia, how would you like to look at the future in this era of hypersonic intercontinental ballistic missiles?
Well, I would suggest three things in this regard. Firstly, since human beings are human beings, and however much you might wish for peace and all the resources and attention being devoted to progress of humanity, the fact is that war does remain. There are attempts by people to create disturbance. Therefore, you have to develop your scientific capabilities. DRDO has already demonstrated a technology demonstrator. They have to continue to pursue it and do everything possible to see that the country is secure against any such potential threats. And I should also say that no nation can continue to develop technologically unless it also develops economically. So, we have to pay a great deal of attention to accelerating economic growth and having a much greater base of scientific infrastructure, so that not only these kinds of capabilities, but other related capabilities also we continue to develop. But even more important than that is the kind of diplomatic effort that we need in order to see that there is stability in the international environment. Once we have these kinds of capabilities, we really will face no possible threat from smaller adversaries. I need not name them, but we have some of them in our neighborhood. They might resort to asymmetric warfare like terrorism. In this context, what is important is that we launch a massive diplomatic effort to see that any disputes or differences that we might have are settled, and we also arrive at some practical agreements to see that there is stability in the security environment.
The new note is the note of more settlements and agreement, so that there are no surprises.
Yeah, so obviously it is important to have stability in the environment, and for that we have to have agreements
and more understanding.
More understanding.
Right.
Yes.
So, on that new note of understanding, we come to the end of this edition of War and Peace, your go-to program on security matters and geopolitics. If you wish to write to us, you can send an email to warandpeace2004@hotmail.com. You can also send your letters to War and Peace, room 513, Tower B, Doordarshan Bhavan, Copernicus Marg, New Delhi 110001. And let's remind you, viewers, that when you write to us, you must mention your phone number and address. So thank you, Dr. Shavasana Pillai, who joined us from Chennai.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Satish Nambiar, who joined us from Noida.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. N.S. Sisodia, for sharing your insights with us. And thank you all. Bye-bye.